Look, if you're an iOS engineer, a product manager, or a CTO right now, there's a very good chance a massive wave of panic is currently sweeping through your development teams. Across the tech industry, everyone's feeling the pressure of this perceived, mandatory design overhaul hanging over their heads. People are scrambling, budgets are being completely reallocated, and Slack channels are literally blowing up over something called the liquid glass mandate. But here's the fascinating part, and what we're going to dive into today. This explainer is going to show you exactly why this massive impending deadline doesn't actually exist in the way you think it does.
There is a quote going around that just perfectly sums up the chaos right now. It says, half the engineering internet is currently quoting an Apple deadline that Apple never published. I really want to validate your stress for a second, because the migration work your team is staring down, that part is entirely real. However, the countdown clock attached to it is completely fabricated. What's happened is that vendor blogs and internet rumors have basically collapsed multiple distinct toolchain updates into a single fictional drop-dead mandate. They've turned a totally routine update into a massive fire drill.
Which brings us to the core mystery of this explainer. The big question we really need to answer is, why do liquid glass deadlines persist? I mean, if Apple never actually published a date saying you must redesign your app in liquid glass or be rejected, what is the technical reality that tricked so many brilliant developers into believing that they did? You know, there's always a grain of truth in these rumors. Finding that truth is absolutely crucial for scoping your engineering work correctly, instead of, funding a rushed and panicked redesign.
So let's clear the air. The rumor mill claims a mandatory visual overhaul is required for App Store approval right this second. But the reality? It's far more mundane. Apple just instituted a standard SDK floor. That means, as of April 28, 2026, all new app submissions and updates just need to be built with Xcode 26 and the iOS 26 SDK. That's literally it. It's a standard toolchain deprecation cycle, just to make sure apps work with new hardware and security protocols. It is not a visual compliance mandate. Apple isn't checking your app's aesthetics to see if they're shiny enough to pass review. Now sure, Apple's historically silent deprecation cycles can definitely cause anxiety, but this one is strictly about the underlying toolchain.
Before we solve the mystery of why things suddenly look broken, let's just quickly define what this new aesthetic actually is. Liquid glass is not just some static frosted overlay. It's a highly dynamic, GPU-accelerated design material. It's used primarily for interface Chrome, so think your tab bars, your navigation headers, modals, that sort of thing. What it does is reflect and refract its surroundings in real time. So when a user scrolls, the navigation bar becomes transparent to highlight the underlying content. Tab bars shrink down into these condensed floating pills and then expand when you scroll up. It's absolutely beautiful, but yeah, it's technically complex.
Okay, so here is the exact aha moment. This right here is exactly why the deadline myth persists. Imagine an engineer updates to Xcode 26 and hits recompile. Because of the new SDK, any standard UI components automatically adopt the new liquid glass styling, which, of course, instantly breaks any custom-styled UI you might have. Text bleeds, layouts conflict, margins completely collapse. The developer sees their app visually shattering on the simulator and naturally assumes, oh no, Apple is rejecting non-compliant designs. But those visual UI breaks aren't a rejection. They're just the default styling consequence of recompiling against the mandatory toolchain. The new SDK simply renders standard components differently now.
When we really break down who faces an expensive migration, it's essentially a tale of two codebases. If your app is built entirely with standard SwiftUI or UIKit components, you are fine. Recompiling applies the new design language automatically with zero code changes. But it's the custom components that are going to cause trouble. System navigation and tab bars. Well, if you have custom solid backgrounds, they block that real-time dynamic blur. Fixing that requires a lot of heavy engineering work. Custom bottom sheets and modals. They don't auto-adopt at all, and their custom border radiuses conflict heavily with the new system defaults. Basically, if your app relies on rigid safe area insets or legacy shadow properties, your elements are actively fighting the liquid glass rendering engine.
And of course, cross-platform developers get to face a completely unique set of headaches here. If you're building with React Native or Flutter, you're bypassing standard UIKit components entirely. You're using JavaScript or Dart to paint custom views to the screen. And because these frameworks don't inherently use Apple's underlying system Chrome, recompiling them does not magically give you the dynamic liquid glass effect. So the rest of the OS behaves dynamically, but your cross-platform app remains stubbornly static, which makes it feel, honestly, aggressively non-native to the user.
So, what's the strategic fix for cross-platform? Well, for React Native, teams are going to need to implement specialized bridging libraries. Packages like @callstack/liquid-glass Drop in components that reproduce those specular highlights and edge refraction to match the OS. But hey, there is a massive warning here, specifically for healthcare, financial, or data-dense applications. You absolutely cannot afford to have clinical data stylistically blended into a translucent warning modal, right? In high-stakes apps, engineers should explicitly set background opacities to simulate the glass aesthetic, while rigidly preserving the legibility of the critical data underneath.
Now, if you are staring at your broken UI right now and sweating, just take a breath. Apple actually built in a temporary escape hatch. It's a Boolean key you add to your info.plist file called UI design requires compatibility. By setting this to yes, you force the system to render the app using the pre-iOS 26 legacy design language, even though you're built with the required Xcode 26 SDK. This means you satisfy the App Store requirement today without needing an immediate visual overhaul. It buys your engineering team some seriously vital time. But, and this is a very big but, you need to understand the technical limitations of this escape hatch. The compatibility flag functions strictly as an app-wide binary setting. It's all or nothing. You cannot selectively disable Liquid Glass on a per-component or per-screen basis. The system either renders the entire application in compatibility mode, or it fully applies the modern Liquid Glass language. So if you're hoping for granular control during your rollout, you can't rely on the flag. You actually have to design that into your own architecture. So let's map out the actual factual roadmap you need to plan your sprints around. April 2026 is the Xcode 26 floor we're looking at right now. June 2026 brings the Xcode 27 beta, and testing confirms that this new beta actually ignores the compatibility opt-out flag entirely. And because the App Store SDK floor historically advances every April, this points us directly to April 2027. That projected Xcode 27 migration is your true scheduling constraint. That is when the escape hatch disappears for good.
Which means the immediate risk of delaying this work is not an App Store rejection. Apple's automated submission systems will happily accept an application containing the compatibility flag built on Xcode 26 today. The real risk, the ticking time bomb in your codebase, is market rating damage. Relying indefinitely on that compatibility flag just masks structural regressions that exist in your app right now, regressions that simply aren't surfacing to your QA team yet.
Just think about what happens to your App Store rating when that flag forcefully expires next spring. Your application is going to forcefully render half-adapted Liquid Glass elements right next to your legacy solid components. Text is going to bleed illegibly into navigation bars. Floating tab bars will conflict with hard-coded layout math. End users notice that kind of interface disjointedness immediately. And when your app feels distinctly broken, consumers review it harshly. They're going to punish your app with 1-star ratings, even if your core backend functionality is working perfectly.
So how does CTOs and product managers safely scope this work backward from early 2027? You follow an actionable playbook. Start with the discovery phase by temporarily pulling the flag on a staging branch just to see what actually breaks. Next, execute strict hardware-level testing and a comprehensive component audit to document every single custom-styled navbar and modal. Follow that up with asset regeneration, and finally, run strict validation for dark mode and accessibility. Why? Because Liquid Glass highlights act very differently when system text is maximized or when backgrounds are dark.
Now there's one technical caveat on that list you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Hardware-level testing. You literally cannot rely on the Xcode simulator for this migration. Liquid Glass utilizes GPU-accelerated rendering and real-time motion response. Those characteristics just do not render with full visual fidelity on a simulator. If your QA team isn't testing on physical hardware running iOS 26, they are for sure going to miss critical regressions.
And another crucial detail here, asset regeneration. This isn't just about the code, it's heavily about design. Your engineering team needs to involve their design counterparts early. To build the primary application icon for the new OS, you have to use Apple's new Icon Composer app. This is required to generate the multi-layered .icon files that dial in the specific specular highlights in vertical light angles that Liquid Glass demands.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway from this explainer is this. The current panic is based on a myth, but the work is incredibly real. Apple's real deadline isn't today, it's April 2027 when the compatibility flag expires. You actually have the time to phase this redesign over multiple standard development sprints rather than treating it like some last-minute fire drill. But the clock is ticking on that 2027 migration, so I'll leave you with this provocative thought. By the time April 2027 rolls around, will your app be natively ready and beautiful, or will your market ratings shatter like glass? The time to pull that flag in your staging environment and start your UI migration is today.